Hello, I'm Clark Eagling, and today I'd like to talk about current developments in e-waste disposal in 2014. Who makes it, who breaks it, and who takes it. So what is e-waste? Well, the U.S. government's Environmental Protection Agency defines it thusly. E-waste describes used electronics that are nearing the end of their useful life. The EPA recognizes the inherent value with these materials that can be reused, refurbished, or recycled to minimize the actual waste that might end up in a landfill or improperly disposed in an unprotected dump site, either in the U.S. or abroad. So, what do they mean by inherent value? Well, for one thing, some e-waste may still be useful. I haven't seen a good estimate for this, but it's not too far-fetched to believe that many of the computers, cell phones, game consoles, and other devices that get thrown out are not yet obsolete and could find a second home either inside or outside developed nations. Secondly, modern electronic components often include precious metals and rare earth elements like gold, silver, copper, nickel, lithium, neodymium, and coltan, which incidentally is supplied primarily from Congo in sub-Saharan Africa, a poor and war-torn country in the developing world. I'll talk more about how e-waste affects the developing world in a moment. In any event, the presence of those rare earth elements makes e-waste recycling valuable, but it is not currently being done with any consistency. According to the Consumer Electronics Association, the CEA, Americans now own approximately 24 electronic products per household, and the EPA estimates that in 2009, U.S. consumers and businesses discarded 2.37 million tons of e-waste. Approximately 25% of those electronics were collected for recycling, with the remainder being disposed of primarily in landfills where the precious metals cannot be recovered. However, at present, there is no federal mandate to recycle e-waste, despite the fact that some electronics test hazardous under federal law and are defined as hazardous waste. In late February 2014, the United Nations University and the World Health Organization released the findings of the first global survey investigating the impacts of e-waste recycling on child health. They found that health outcomes studied varied widely from chemical burns to cancer to growth retardation. And the risks involved with exposure to children are a very real concern. In January, a German photojournalist named Kevin McAlvany published a blog post filled with pictures, videos, and words that give a vivid impression of the harsh reality found in an e-waste dumping ground outside of Ghana. In the photos and video, we see huge charred fields of burning plastic, never-ending streams of smoke, and people with makeshift bandages wrapped around their heads working to destroy and harvest materials from all types of electronics. And from the looks of it, their homes and livestock, cows, goats, and chickens, are right inside the dump with them. Agbogbloshie is a wetland and a former recreation area, which is surrounded by rivers that stream through a lagoon straight into the Atlantic Ocean. Here you see old CRT monitors used to build a bridge across a pond. McAlvany described what he saw while he was there, writing that, quote, "Before you enter the burning fields of Agbogbloshie, you will recognize a huge market. You will see men sitting on broken TVs, smashing their hammers and simple tools against any kind of car parts, machines, and electronic devices. Behind this area, huge fires and enormous clouds of smoke dominate the landscape. Here, most of the people are kids between the age of 7 and 25, who start their day at sunrise and end their work at sunset. The 40,000 settlers themselves call this area Sodom and Gomorrah." McAlvany interviewed some of the workers and had this to say, quote, "Some boys are careful and know about the risks. Other ones don't know and walk around in flip-flops. Still other ones know the consequences but don't care anymore. One of those I met was Idris Zacharias, who's 20 years old. He just said, 'What you do to get money is what kills you,' and continued to poke with a stick in his fire, where he burnt cables, small electro engines, and capacitors, which explode a few times while I was standing next to him. For him, this was everyday life, and deep scars in his face and arms, the risk he has to take." Another 20-year-old who had just arrived from the Ivory Coast told McAlvany that, quote, "This is the place where he wants to be and why he traveled so far," Continuing, McAlvany writes, I wondered why he was satisfied with this situation, but then he told me that because of Civil War struggles in his homeland, he lost his mom, dad, and brother, and decided to stay here rather than to fight and maybe die there. Let's look at another face of e-waste. This portrait of Steve Jobs was created this year by artist Jason Messier, who has used junk to make portraits for all sorts of famous people, from Barack Obama to David Bowie. In this case, his chosen medium of bits of cell phones, iPods, headphones, Macintosh keyboards, CDRs, batteries, mice, memory sticks, and other upcycled trash from Apple is especially appropriate because Apple has arguably become the leader of planned obsolescence. And for years, late Apple CEO Steve Jobs was the man who would come out on stage year after year to show the world the new must-have tech gadget like the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad that he claimed would change the way they worked, played, and even thought. So what is planned obsolescence? According to the weekly international newspaper The Economist, planned obsolescence is a business strategy in which the process of becoming obsolete, that is, unfashionable or no longer usable, is planned and built into a product from its conception. This is done so that in the future, the consumer feels a need to purchase new products and services that the manufacturer brings out as replacements for the old ones. So how is planned obsolescence built into a device? Well, the jump from the iPhone 4 to the iPhone 5 makes a good case study. For one thing, the newer iPhone 5 has a new, smaller connector port for charging it or connecting it to a computer or one of the many accessory devices that are created by other manufacturers, like clock radios and Bluetooth speakers, and even microphones, movie projectors, and DJ stations with the iPhone and iPod docks embedded in them. All the previous versions of the iPhone and iPod Touch shared a common, compatible port, but now, when it's time to upgrade to a new iPhone or iPod or iPad, the accessories that you may have used for half a decade will no longer connect to your Apple device. That makes those accessories obsolete. It turns them into e-waste. And there are millions of the things out there in the wild. In the last fiscal quarter alone, Apple reported that it sold over $1.3 billion worth of accessories. And that number does not include the many, many accessories that were sold outside Apple's store through retailers like Best Buy and Amazon.com. And there are myriad reports about people experiencing crashes, slowness, and erratic behavior after installing Apple's newest mobile operating system, iOS 7, on any device older than the iPhone 5. Just do a Google search for the terms iPhone, iOS, slow to see what I mean. I myself own a Google Android smartphone, one of the Nexus line sold directly to consumers by Google, which was the newest and fastest device on the market when I bought it about a year and a half ago. After the latest software updates, my phone often runs very slowly and it won't respond to taps or voice commands at times. Even simple tasks like text messages routinely take as long as 10 seconds to complete after I press the send button. Important applications like Google Maps often crash while I'm driving, which did not happen when I first bought the phone. Now this is just an anecdotal observation, but it seems obvious to me as a consumer that Google is not concerned with how their ongoing parade of application and operating system updates affect my expensive, complicated device that will become another piece of e-waste someday in the near future. The vast majority of these gadgets, as we know, are manufactured in China. From China they come, and to China they return. China imports and processes more garbage than any other country. A lot of that garbage is e-waste, and a lot of that e-waste is illegally smuggled in and improperly processed. In late February, China announced a crime bust of 3 black market groups that were in the process of smuggling 72,000 tons of e-waste from the USA, Europe, and Japan. And the EPA acknowledges the black market, saying, quote, an undetermined amount is shipped from the United States and other developed countries to developing countries that lack the capacity to reject imports or to handle these materials appropriately. Without proper standards and enforcement, improper practices may result in public health and environmental concerns even in countries where processing facilities exist. E-waste is attractive to the black market because recycling it can be lucrative, as I mentioned earlier, But unsafe extraction processes can lead to the release of toxic chemicals and carcinogens into the environment, where they seep into groundwater, poison wildlife, and, according to the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, contribute to China's 459 cancer villages, where the cancer rate has risen far above the national average. Many of these villages are adjacent to both polluting industry and rivers or lakes, like the Goyu village, which processes 1 million tons of e-waste per year. Goyu made news in the West in 2008 when extremely high lead levels were found in the dirt there, over 300 times as much as control samples taken only 3.5 miles away. And just as we saw in Agbogbloshie, young children live and work in the village and are at disproportionately high risk of lead poisoning. More than 70% of China's rivers and lakes are polluted, according to a government study, and 43% may contain water that is unfit for human contact. While much of the pollution is attributable to fertilizer runoff and untreated sewage discharges, chemical spills are a particularly severe and difficult to clean part of the problem. 8 million tons of e-waste is smuggled into China each year, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And the EPA acknowledges the scope of the problem, pointing out that there are problems with open-air burning and acid baths, and claiming that these practices can expose workers to high levels of contaminants such as lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic, which can lead to irreversible health effects, including cancers, miscarriages, neurological damage, and diminished IQs. In February, Al Jazeera released a video news package about the rise of e-waste imports into Pakistan and the potential problems and opportunities the trend is creating. The story is much the same as in Africa and China. E-waste that can't be refurbished is recycled locally in the absence of proper disposal centers, and Al Jazeera interviewed a 12-year-old boy who'd been recycling e-waste instead of attending school. According to the United Nations STEP initiative, and STEP stands for Solving the E-Waste Problem, e-waste is now the world's fastest growing waste stream. The global volume of e-waste is expected to grow by 33% in the next 4 years. In 2012, nearly 50 metric tons of e-waste was generated worldwide, over 15 pounds for every person on the planet. An old-style CRT computer screen can contain up to 6.6 pounds of lead. But this year has seen emerging prospects for the legitimization of the e-waste disposal industry. 25 states have passed legislation mandating e-waste recycling. Most states place the burden of proper disposal on the gadget manufacturers themselves. These are known as producer responsibility laws, which require manufacturers to pay for recycling. In addition, 17 states have banned consumers from throwing some or all e-waste into the trash. Missouri plans to vote on legislation to do the same later this year. E-waste collection events are held year-round in many U.S. municipalities. In one way or another, 65% of the population of the U.S. is now covered by a state e-waste recycling law. However, while congressional investigations and community efforts have attempted to stem the tide of black market e-waste disposal, American gadgets are still showing up in unregulated dumps in the developing world. But new resources like Leo Rowdy's Rejuvet.com helps connect electronic manufacturers and retailers with legitimate U.S.-based recycling services. Leo Rowdy launched Rejuvet.com in the spring of 2014. He says that, quote, if you're a business looking to get rid of the stuff responsibly and cost-effectively, it's really, really hard to do. There are good actors out there are bad actors out there, and there are a whole bunch in between. And when you think of the data security risks and environmental risks associated with IT development and electronics, there is very little margin for error.